Hi, this is Jay Dicharry, physical therapist, author, researcher, and founder and creator of MOBO Board. You're listening to Physical Performance Show with Brad Beer.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Physiocram and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll aim to bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration from our guests' highs, lows, and learnings, all designed to help you perform at your physical best. We do this across a range of different episodes, including interest editions, coaches' corners, expert editions, and featured performers. And on today's episode, we feature a recent conversation that I had with US-based physical therapist, biomechanics researcher, and author Jay Dicharry. This is an expert edition into which we dive foot first around all things how the foot can assist with injury minimization, athlete resilience, and ultimately performance. By way of bio, Jay Dicharry has built his reputation as an expert in biomechanical analysis as the director of the Speed Clinic at the University of Virginia, and now as a director of the Rep Biomechanics Lab in Bend, Oregon. Jay has a passion for solving injury problems and optimizing performance. He's the author of 2 books, Running Rewired and Anatomy for Runners, writes for numerous magazine columns, and has published over 35 professional journal articles and book chapters. Jay consults for a variety of footwear companies, the cycling industry, the US Airforce, and USA Track and Field and Triathlon. And most recently, Jay's research work has led him to a patent-pending design and product to improve the foot and lower leg function through MOBO, M-O-B-O. And we'll touch on this new product in today's conversation, along with the problematic trend that Jay observed, and that is that athletes don't tend to train their feet as they like to train the rest of their body. And Jay believes that this oversight leaves seconds on the clock and black holes in an athlete's preparation. Jay is often quoted as saying, if you're going to compete, show up ready. So get ready with a pen and paper on this expert edition around all things training of our feet with US physical therapist, biomechanics researcher, and author, and founder of the MOBO Board, Jay Dicharry. Jay Dicharry, you are prolific in the space of all things physical therapy. I've been following your career for years, and author of Running Rewired, Anatomy for Runners, and now creator of the MOBO Board, and also director of the Rep Lab there in Bend, Oregon. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Thank you very much, Brad. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here today.
Jay, I wonder how you get it all done. You never sit still, which is fantastic it's inspiring with what can be done. But the thing that I most respect about your work is that it's led from a problem-solving approach where you see a problem and you come up with novel ways to do things better. And I think that's the pursuit of a true professional.
Thanks, Brad. It's been, I think that, been trying to find better answers for problems. It's been definitely a big MO of my career.
And Jay, this, we're going to do a deep dive into all things really below the knee, if you like, around the foot, the ankle. You've just launched this incredible device, the MOBO Board, which I think will have implications for athletes, practitioners in the space worldwide. Before we dive into that, though, your career, in a couple of bullet points, can you summarize your career? Where did it all start for Jay Dicharry? How did you even get interested in physical therapy and beyond?
Sure. So it's an interesting course of events. I was a swimmer growing up. and spent much time in the pool. And those of you who swim know you spend a lot of time. I spent probably 20 to 25 hours, even as a junior, every single week. And, I built a tremendous engine. And in high school, it was literally forced to run. And I was very fit, but I literally would show up, run a great time in the meets the weekends, and would be so hurt I could barely run all week. And, swimming just didn't develop a very robust chassis. And I had massive patellofemoral pain my entire time through high school. And I'd go see docs left and right, and they'd say, oh, well, it hurts. You should stop running. And I just hated that answer that I couldn't do something at, 16 years old. I thought it was ridiculous. So lo and behold, I think that started my search for better answers. Ended up going to PT school to try and find out better answers. Got out of school, practiced for a few years, find out all the great stuff I learned in school didn't really work as well as I was told, and came into a very unique opportunity. We had just gotten a new department chair at University of Virginia, and she had a startup fund to get the first instrumented treadmill in North America. And so we had one of those, and I was a kid in a candy store. I was like, hey, what do you think about doing some stuff cool here? She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, we do a lot of research, right? And that's great. And obviously it's a big mission of the department, but wouldn't it be really cool if we could actually have individual athletes come in? And so you not only have clinical data, but you've got true lab data on every single athlete we see. And she's like, that's a cool idea. So she's like, what do you want to look at? And I said, I don't know. And I went to a library for 3 months and I read every single solitary paper on biomechanical analysis I could find out. And, again, this is novel technology, right? I mean, force plates hadn't been around that long. Instrumented treadmills, we had number 2 in the world. So it was an interesting time to take, what you have from mocap data in labs and what, instrumented treadmills allow us to do. And over the years, stuff started to become, hazy, and then started to become more transparent to find out when you see a clinical finding, how does that really play out in gait, right? And then when you make an intervention, what type of things do you expect to see? And I think that's the big thing I've tried to do in my career is establish cause and effect from here's a clinical test, which may be nice, to here's a clinical test that actually has an impact on the way somebody runs.
That early seed, Jay, of searching for better answers, I can certainly relate to that. I was a junior triathlete with patellofemoral pain myself, and was reading the books and going, there's got to be better ways than just not running. So it's quite a neat synchrony there. But those better answers, it's been a lifelong pursuit. Your current working week, how are you splitting it up amongst all the things that you're doing? Are you in the lab with patients? You do work with the US Olympic Committee and professional athletes. So what's a typical week look like?
Everything you just said. So my week is split between, I do kind of clinical hours. So it's always people think, oh, you only treat elites. I love treating everybody. I mean, it's fun to get different demographics, different walks of life. So I definitely say my patients are definitely more targeted toward the active crowd. But I treat patients as part of my hours. The majority of my hours a week are probably spent doing performance analysis. So I do, lab analysis, looking at, what type of weak links have caused overuse injuries to what type of things. Some runners say, come in, hey, I'm looking for 8 minutes off my marathon split. What can we get here? So doing individual analysis to find out what limiters are. And then I do research, which comes in waves. Some of that's done for NGBs. Some of it's done for the military, doing athlete preparation type programs and readiness programs. Some of this is done. I do a lot of consulting for the shoe industry, trying to validate and innovate different products. So definitely a lot of oars in the water, but it's fun.
You keep rowing. And Jay, let's if we can just for a moment, you take that runner that arrives to see yourself, who wants to take 8 minutes off their marathon PB. With your biomechanical skills and deep knowledge and research over the years, and then your clinical hat on, morphing those two, where do you start? Like take me through a sort of a practical assessment of where you'd start with a runner that rocks up to see you like that.
Yeah, that's the fun part, right? I mean, so, I ask every athlete I see, I begin with the same question, what are your goals? Why are you here? How can I help you? And so, you learn a lot. Some people will tell you 2 sentences, not some ramble for a while, but I think that's the big thing is you figure out, what are your goals? And I look at myself as an independent resource to find out, is the training and, if you want to call it biomechanical or rehab or prehab or whatever word you want to use, over the past, month, weeks, years, et cetera, has that really resulted in an objective, approach to your goals, right? And so you hit the nail on the head. It's looking at the physiological training preparation as well as the biomechanical side. What are you doing? Well, I got this core plan online, and that was from somebody. Okay, great. All right, so if I have that core plan in mind, I expect to see improvements, right? If you can't master some basic skills from that core preparation, then the things you're doing is not working, right? I had a gentleman come the other day. He's a 52-year-old male, runs 100 miles a week, right? A lot. And he wants to run sub 250 for his marathon. I was like, man, you're running 100 miles a week, and you're at a 258, like. What are you doing? And he told me all his running is pretty much even pace. And we're like, okay, look, it's great to have a big aerobic engine, but you need energy systems developed that you're not even tapping into. Let's have a conversation on how to, hit some different targets. He had some, very key perineal pain over the past year and a half he wasn't able to address. What type of things have you done? Well, balance work. We know all balance work isn't created equal. So, I take that subjective, time to look back and say, what's going on and what have you done, right? And how's that changed things, and are your goals being met? And that's, I think it's like a nice time to kind of just sit down and say, wait a second, where are we? And benchmark your preparation, benchmark your training, and figure out how can we get you where you want to go.
Yeah, starting with the end in mind, and it's nice to hear you reflect on that, Jay. I feel certainly in my work sometimes so much more than a physical therapist. You're trying to incorporate all the aspects that are potentially going to contribute to the performance. Jay, let's talk about the foot and ankle. I have a fun little trite saying, below the knee is the key. I think it's an area that often gets overlooked for runners, triathletes, weekend warriors at large. And there's few people on the planet that have spent more time around it than yourself. I pulled up a little bit of research here just in terms of, athletic injury epidemiology. Injuries to the foot and ankle account for 30% of all running-related injuries, and 35% of runners will experience an injury to their foot and ankle across their running lifespan. And, the reasons for that can be many, but the reality is it's a frequent area of injury. So, Jay, can we start at the beginning and maybe do a little Anatomy 101 from the author himself of Anatomy for Runners? What's in the area, and then why does it even matter?
Let's take a step back for a second, Brad, and even talk about what's happened over time, right? If you look back, 15 years ago, and we had a discussion, a podcast, right, talking to runners, and we say, hey, you should try and do some core work and some hip activation. And people were like, what? And, it's over the past 10, 15 years, that's almost become commonplace, right? People understand that, there's a lot of, mobility in my spine. I need to control that. There's a lot of postural things I want to think about. There's a lot of thought imbalances, et cetera, right? And so when you look at how training's morphed, we're still in the scenario where, you say below the knee is key. I say anything you can't see winds up not being worked, right? So we put a sock and a shoe over our foot, and we just tend to hope for the best. You've got 26 bones in a foot. That's a very unstable system, and your foot is, by definition, an actively controlled lever, right? It's an actively neuromodulated lever, and it's not just a bunch of bag of bones that either pronate or supinate, right? You're not a column. You're a person, and we need to make sure that we can actively control that foot as it moves throughout stance. I always talk, it's not just runners, it's any running athlete, right, needs to have some quality control in their foot and ankle. And that's your base of support for the ground. It's your cue to where you are in space. And there's a big feedback, afferent and efferent, so into the brain, out of the brain feedback loop in relation to where a foot is and how it reacts and how we stabilize proximally. And it's the input system.
You said a couple of things here that jumped out. It's an actively controlled lever. It's tempting, as you say, whatever you can't see, you kind of forget and overlook. But it's tempting just to think it just swings there passively and it just hangs on the end of the tibia or the shin, and it'll do its thing. And I must say, I've been guilty of that over the years. It wasn't until I was challenged by the physio for British Athletics who said, if you have a runner with a calf strain, you're not doing foot work, you probably need to have a look at your game. That I've started to really put the hat on. So Jay, as you say, it's actively controlled. That to me implies that the control of the foot can be improved.
100%. So let's talk a little about just anatomy for a second. So when you look at your hand, let's talk about the hand for a second because it's easy people to relate to. If you look at your hand, how many joints do you have in each finger? right? You can curl it and just check it out. You have 3 joints in each finger, right? And you have 2 joints in your thumb, right? Your thumb has a very different anatomical purpose than your fingers. Your fingers are great and designed to curl around things, and your thumb is designed to lock in a pose, right? If you're going to drive a nail with a hammer, you don't hammer with your thumb off the shaft, where the hammer is very unstable. You wrap your thumb around the shaft for support and stability, okay? So that's pretty obvious to most people. Let's look down at the foot. In the foot, what you've got is you've got little toes 2 through 5 are the same thing as your fingers, right? They've got 3 joints, and your lesser toes are designed to curl and grab around things, okay? They're great for picking socks up off the floor. When you look at the first ray, architecturally, it's very different, right? You've got 2 joints in there, okay? And you've got 2 quote kneecaps, right? Your kneecap is a pulley for your quad, right? Guess what? You've got 2 little kneecaps under your big toe called your sesamoids, and those bones act to change the leverage of the muscles inside the foot. Okay, so what you've got is a distal lever with those toes, right? And then we've got a bunch of bones in the midfoot, and all those bones are very mobile. Okay, some more than others. Okay, but every foot's going to move. And I think that, we can talk about research if you want to a little bit, but, I think one of the seminal projects we did in my career was looking at different foot types and how people move. And we've been told that some people are, move a little, some move a lot, some in the middle. We have different goals for each one. When you look at how much feet move when people actually walk and run, there's very, very, very little difference in net mobility. We looked at hypomobile to hypermobile people, so high arch to low arch. When you have people walk, there was no statistically different difference in navicular drop, which is how much your foot deforms and rebounds in walking with people, different foot types. And when we ran, we had a statistically different difference of 1.2 to 1.7 millimeters between our stiffest and most supple feet. So again, don't get caught up on what type of foot I have, right? I always tell people, any foot that walks into our clinic, right, we need to help, right? As an athlete, any foot you have, we need to help, right? So don't get worried about your structure. We want to look at how you use those levers, okay? And I think that my big pet peeve with most of our clinical world is, the state of care is, come out of your, rehab and you do some TheraBand sweeps back and forth and you do some towel curls and marble pickups and you call it good. That's not solving the problem. Okay. Again, your lesser toe's job is to curl. And when they curl, what happens is the base of your big toe comes up off the floor. Okay, so I would challenge any of your listeners to tell me a sport in which you want to pull the big toe off the ground to improve stability. That's not how we control our body, right? So when you look at, the problem is that we don't have good control through our big toe. We don't have that stability. The majority of control our plant mechanics come from our first ray. And if we can't get the first ray properly down on the ground, which is through motion of the foot, and we can't get our big toe to work properly, we lose leverage, we lose control, ability in the ankle, in the knee, in the hip, in the spine, right? We have a complete change in postural dynamics. So what you don't see in your shoe, okay, actually has a very big input on what happens to everything, right? And so we've got all these reflex arcs in our body, right, that we should be able to actively modulate and control things. Those of you who are familiar with this, when you look at kids and kind of younger athletes, when you have a little minor sway, right, we tend to have what's called a foot and ankle strategy where we tend to micro-correct, right, our foot. So let's take an example. You're on a trail run and you hit a little rock and you don't have to think about it, right? You don't have to say, wow, I hit a rock, my ankle moved, 10 degrees in inversion. I will now fire my perineals to drive my first met down and plant through and take a step. That just happens automatically. And so when we look at what happens as people age, we lose that foot and ankle control, right? We don't work on it, and we tend to adopt more of a hip and a trunk strategy, which means we tend to shift our body weight and we tend to sway our trunk. And what that does is actually impart more instability into the system. So we're always trying to look at how can we, reflexively work on being proactive in how we use our feet to give a better foundation for the tissues in the foot, but also upstream.
That's an incredible amount of information, but it's also, a few real key things jump out, Jay, and one would be don't worry about your foot type. I love what you said. Any foot can be helped. You've done the research, irrespective of whether they were a neutral, hypo or hyper, lots of movement around the foot, the actual navicular movement or a bone in the foot when we run is very, very insignificant across those 3 groups. And I saw a great post you put up there on MOBO Board's channel. It said, let's not get bogged down with foot types. Feet move more similar than differently. You aren't a label, you aren't a foot type, you are an athlete. Your body weight rises and falls, your foot moves from heel support through to full contact and then toe off. All places varied stress and mobility through an actively controlled modulated lever, the foot. So instead of stressing about what sort of foot type you have, spend time controlling the lever. So that really jumped out. That's your words, not mine.
Yeah.
And that brings, then you said the problem, like, why does that matter? Well, the problem is that we don't have good control of the big toe typically. And then the result of that is, and this is what I guess any recreational athlete, therapist working with athletes who all want to perform at their best then need to know, is that can reduce leverage, like you said, the ankle, the hip, the knee, the whole kinetic chain. So I guess that's the root problem, isn't it? Losing leverage and the effects that can have. And that can have effects. What effects can that then have, Jay? Can that have injury-inducing effects? It can have performance detriment effects. What are the effects of losing leverage?
For sure. I mean, so I would say this. I mean, number one, what happens when you train? You get tired. I mean, it's not just for the foot. Everything gets tired, right? And there's research to show that fatigued feet move differently, right? When you lose control, when your feet get tired, they tend to move more with more variability, right? And so we want to think about, okay, well, again, what we said before about thinking backwards, right? The end goal in mind is to try and develop a foot that can last not just for one block, right, but for an entire block of training that can last for a whole marathon. It can last for 800 meters maxed out, right? I think about what's the goal, is training backwards from there. And I want to make sure that I've got durability in mind as I'm building a nice, solid, robust lever from the ground up. That's one key aspect. Number two, there's some research to show, there's not a lot, okay, I'll be fully transparent, but there's research to show that athletes who actually take intervention to develop foot strength tend to run faster, jump higher, and cut harder, right? So for those of you who say, oh, it's only about getting over injury, not so much, right? There's some good evidence research-wise to show this is successful. And again, I sort of cheat because I have a research lab, so I can have an athlete come in, we can do some interventions, and we can recheck them and actually observe differences, right? So we do see things get better when we have a better approach. And the third thing I would say is, it's interesting. It's like an athlete comes in, you have an ACL tear, and it's like, oh my gosh, we call in the National Guard and we have, this award party. It's like, oh, everyone's coming in to help us ACL, and yet a runner has an ankle sprain. We say, oh, it's just an ankle sprain. It'll be fine, right? And I always tell athletes, here's the reality, right? So about 30% of you have an ankle sprain will get lucky, right? You have an ankle sprain and you don't develop chronic instability. About 70% of people who have an ankle sprain develop what we call chronic ankle instability, right? So Jay Hurdle at AVA was just amazing to work with over my career, and he looks at all aspects of what an ankle sprain does. It's not just an ankle sprain. The tissue, when you tear ligaments, right, ligaments heal really strong. They heal to 97, 98% of their original strength. And ring barriers, the joint capsule, are pretty strong and robust even after injury. But that neural network that you've got, like the input, the proprioceptive aspect, that tissue, once it's torn, is gone, right? And so you've lost that input back to your brain on where is my foot and ankle. And so what we tend to see is athletes adopt a pattern of compensation, right? Athletes with chronic ankle instability tend to stay more plantar flexed, which is toe down, and inverted, which is kind of foot in. And they do that even before they contact the ground. So even before you are at the ground, you have a complete shift in the way we prepare our foot and ankle for contact. And that's a bad strategy. You're putting it in a more vulnerable position, right? So when you look at, trying to look at rehab, it's not just about, building, strength in the calf. It's about how does that foot torsion down to the ground? Can I actually teach the foot to get down to the ground? Because that's what you're trying to do, is you have to get your first ray down to the floor, right? So the entire goal of pronation is to get your big toe down so you can achieve a solid support surface. And folks with chronic ankle instability don't do that. They tend to keep their foot much more inclined and lose that support, and they tend to shift and spin off the outside of the foot and never achieve proper support. And then we have this downward spiral of over and over again injury. So I think it's a key thing there. It's looking at, improving durability, right? Because I don't want your foot to fail and start to move with more variability and fall apart. I want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on performance. We train our feet for performance, just like we train our core for performance. And then again, we look at rehab aspects of this. Make sure you're thinking full circle. It's not just trying to, quote, develop more tensile strength in the ligament. You're actually trying to redevelop that neural pathway to improve the proprioceptive aspect of how we control our body.
And so you mentioned, Jay, there's some literature to support the role of foot strengthening on performance, but it's a work in progress, and that doesn't mean there's not a cause and effect relationship. It can just be the state of research at the time. But I imagine, like you just shared, in the case of ankle sprains, which it's funny you mentioned that. I just finished a great Aspetar lecture from one of the presenters there talking about ankle sprains and how we don't just say someone had a knee sprain. As you say, we're like, well, was it an MCL? Was it an ACL? And what are we now going to do? And crikey, we're not going to let you walk out and just rehab yourself. Yet it can be such a casual approach with it's just a benign old ankle sprain. So the timing of this is incredible. You mentioned that controlling the foot, getting that big toe down creates that stability for the foot and ankle that it so desperately wants and desires, and that can be detrimented with ankle instability there through an ankle sprain. So there must be some strong research out there around the role of foot strengthening for injury, rehabilitation, prevention. What's the status of the literature, Jay?
Yeah, so when you look at the ankle instability research, there actually is a pretty good body of evidence that a targeted approach to improve proprioception is very critical. And let's actually take a little tangent here, Brad, because this is one of my big pet peeves with the rehab world. When you look at the current state, right? So again, we come out of a boot or you have a fresh sprain and we give TheraBand exercises to keep muscles activated and great, right? So then we talk about, okay, well, let's prepare the foot to be on the ground, right? So a lot of therapists will take out, the RX pads, the little balance mats, and a lot of patients go in and we balance on things, right? And so I would challenge you to tell me why you're doing that. Okay, and here's why. When you stand up on a cushioned surface, what you're doing is you're impairing proprioceptive information back to our brain. Okay, the exact thing you're trying to improve is not a sway from your hip and your trunk, right? You're trying to improve that somatosensory input of our foot to give us information where we are, right? So if you take that away, that's a very challenging environment for our patients to actually learn and get better, right? We want to help people. We want to put our athletes in the best possible environment to make better neuromuscular decisions, right? And so, and for those of you who don't understand what I just said, if you look at vestibular rehab, well, we use three primary reflexes for balance. One's vision, one's inner ear, one's our proprioceptive feedback, right? So we have vestibular patients. We want them to improve their reliance on vestibular function and vision. And so what we do is we actually take proprioception away by putting them in soft, squishy objects, okay? So that's been done for decades, right? So if you're trying to improve someone's proprioception, why would you put them in an environment where they can't really find and feel the floor? That just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Okay, so when you look at the type of environment we're putting our patients in, you want a nice, consistent environment where my brain can feel, sense, adapt, and learn. And so when you think about adapting, you want to make sure, I'm really a big proponent of making sure we have what I call full foot contact for a lot of stages of retraining, because you want to make sure that the calcaneus, the rear foot, right, can move appropriately. You want to make sure the midfoot can move appropriately and the toes can move appropriately to achieve solid contact from the entire foot. Because if you can't, you need to talk to your therapist, or you as a therapist need to go back and figure out, okay, can I achieve adequate motion at the rear foot? Can I achieve adequate motion at the forefoot? Can I achieve adequate, contact to make sure I can get to ground zero, right? One of the things I do in my evals with every single athlete is just, trying to draw in their consciousness, right? When I have them stand on one leg, hey, where do you feel your balance point? Is it outside of the foot, middle of the foot, or inside of the foot, right? And I'm already trying to bring them in to think about, where is my balance point, okay? And so most folks tend to be either kind of what I call wobble, right, or kind of balance on the outside of the foot, and that's very reactive, not very proactive. Or some folks will tend to, dive towards the medial aspect of the foot, the inside, but they lose their stability a lot, right? And that's indicative of more of a mechanical of an instability, right? So we want to find out, how much manual therapy work do we need to do to, what I call, unblock the system, right? If there's a mechanical block in the way you're moving from, say an ankle sprain, or, maybe you roll, again, maybe you had an ankle sprain 3 years ago and just suddenly change your gait, and then all of a sudden you're walking differently on one foot than the other, and that became your normal pattern, right? So those things carry over. So we have to look at, can we address the mechanical block But then once we're there, we have to look at how does that neuromuscular system function? And I think that's where some of the cool research is being done right now to look at, what type of environments are better. There's research to show when you put athletes on soft surfaces, we tend to delay our stability, right? We don't stabilize as fast. And we tend to have more wobble, again, from the trunk and the hip. That's not the best environment, right? When you look at, what type of things, the types of performance changes we're seeing in terms of, it's like just like we train the core, right? It's not about getting a, quote, stronger core. It's looking at timing, right? How can I get rapid activation of muscles inside the feet? Because that neural network needs to work to give me rapid position awareness and stability. And then, from there, then we look at how do you load the pattern, right? And then start to integrate some skill with some more closed chain things. So we don't just train feet, right? We train the whole body. And so can you think about, achieving that solid contact to the ground, train the proper strategy, and integrating our foot with our hip to make sure we control that line of torsion that moves through our entire body.
So, as you said, that this is a pet peeve you've observed with the rehab world is, the environment that practitioners can put patients or athletes or people in who are rehabbing their foot and ankle. As you say, some of the evidence doesn't really, in your own observation, support common practices, like you mentioned. Where do you think, Jay, the barriers are for weekend warriors, people, athletes, and also clinicians? Because I've certainly observed them, and I've had them myself as a practitioner. Like, the foot, it's too finicky. The compliance is poor. You give someone foot exercises, albeit probably bad ones over the years, like you mentioned, good old toe scrunches and things. But, hopefully there's been a few better iterations I've given over the years and there have been. But, I still, hesitate sometimes with compliance if they've got proximal issues to deal with around their, their calf or their hip or whatever it may be. And then the time limitations. And, I personally have found footwork finicky when I've been prescribed it in the past as a junior athlete, etc. So any advice, any suggestions from Jay Dicharry around, imparting compliance? Is it just that it needs to be more fun and novel, and the MOBO board now probably solves that?
Well, I think that there's a few things with this. I mean, it's like, this is no different from any injury, right? I mean, one of the fun things about being a clinician is, I have a bunch of stuff in my brain. Who cares, right? How can I make that information relevant to you as an athlete, right, and to you as a patient? And so, some of that's kind of tapping into what that patient's goals are. And I think that, again, I always say the more skilled an athlete is, the more I want to shut up and let them feel things, right? So if I can, show an athlete a certain, again, foot posture or show them a certain foot coordination task, and most of them are like, wow, I can't do this, right? And so you teach them how to do it, and they get that instant buy-in of like, wow, I get it. Now I can do something I couldn't do, 2 minutes ago. Most of the time for the foot, it's not a, quote, strength issue. Again, it goes back to how do I reflexively, move my foot. So I think the big thing is just, what's your approach? Again, I mentioned, my category for every injury I treat, right, is there a neuromuscular block is there a mechanical block in the system? So if those of you who are clinicians, right, so is your manual therapy approach targeted to making sure I can get what I mentioned before is a critical aspect. Can I get the rear foot to move enough to achieve solid contact from the rear foot? What this looks like, for those of you who are clinicians, again, the research is a little split on foot mechanics because the foot's very hard to model, right? I mean, if you look at it's pretty easy to model a shin. It's easy to model a thigh. It's hard to model all the intricacies of a foot. So there's lots of different foot models out there we use in our lab research. But if on the table, if you can take someone's heel and invert it and evert it, which is deemed normal and appropriate, let's say you can get about 8 degrees of eversion out the rear foot, you've got plenty of motion for the rear foot to adapt to the ground. Then I want you to hold the rear foot in, let's say just 0 degrees, roughly parallel to the tibia, and you want to make sure you can take the forefoot and evert the forefoot past the plane of the rear foot. Okay, if you can do that passively, there's no need to spend 2 hours doing manual therapy with your patients, right? They've got the motion. What you want to do now is look at, okay, how can I teach and train active control within that range of motion? Okay, and so that's the first thing, is unblock what's stuck. Okay. Second thing, right, then we talk about the strategy. And that's what I call the fun part. That's where the patients actually get to be involved and do things. And so the patients who you've got stiffness, let's say they've got a mechanical block in the rear foot, or they have some sort of soft tissue block, or they had a sesamoid restriction, or they had some aspect where they couldn't get the big toe down to the ground. When you address all those things, and I have them stand back up again off the table, I ask them, where's your balance point? And overwhelmingly, wow, my entire metatarsal heads are flat, right? They have that instant buy-in of like, I have a different foot than I did 10 minutes ago. Okay. And so I think that's the first thing is that, is your manual approach correct to find that ability to get the first ray to come down to the floor and get equal pressure across the med heads? Once it's there, people are usually like, okay, what else do you have for me now? Right. So, and then we get in the fun part of, retraining the foot. I've spent a lot of my career trying to get novel ways to get people to cue in. One of my first things I started kind of doing a lot was, you've probably seen this everywhere now, but that little toe yoga exercise where you try and separate out your first ray from your lesser toes. And, we are the only species on the planet that has a separate region of our brain developed specifically to big toe control. And, again, through years of not paying attention to our foot, a lot of athletes tend to lose that. And we say curl, move your big toe, and athletes it's curl all toes, or they kind of can't really drive down. So I work on separating out muscles inside the feet, specifically two muscles called your flexor hallucis brevis, your abductor hallucis. Those muscles are kind of, if you want to almost use the words foot core, right? They work to kind of stabilize that first ray, and they work with the sesamoid bones to make sure we have solid contact down on the ground. And so that toe yoga exercise is great, and there's other little progressions I use, but I developed this device called MOBO to try and scale that approach of how do I give people support where we want it and take it away from where we don't, right? So the whole idea is to shift load over towards the first ray, to give a solid platform so your first ray is in the same plane as the base of your outside of your foot, your fifth metatarsal head, and people can learn and sense and feel how the center of pressure moves within their foot, and they start to go, oh, that makes sense. The different position my foot's in, I'm controlling it, everted. I'm controlling it inverted, right? So I'm moving my foot through full range, because if feet aren't static, I want to make sure I can control everything from soup to nuts.
Yeah, so there's the clinical aspect, and then I think anyone listening that's not a practitioner will have things jump out from that you got to remove some of the blocks in the system and then basically train the function. And as you say, those toe yoga exercises, which we can put links up in the show notes, they are one of your babies by the sounds, and they are prolific. They're adopted by clinicians worldwide. And I have a feeling, Jay, the launch of the MOBO board will kind of split clinical history into PM, pre-MOBO board, and AM, after the MOBO board.
Brad, that'd be amazing.
But it's like, well, how can you make this gamified? How can you gamify something that otherwise, as I mentioned, some of the pushback can be, it's finicky. I can't get it. I can't separate my big toe from the second to fifth toes. But I can feel when I do a bridge, or I can feel when I do a quad extension in the gym. I can't feel this foot stuff. I'm not going to worry about it. Doesn't matter. That's the easy line. So gamifying it through the MOBO board. Just describe, obviously this is an audio format, but describe what it looks like and how on earth did you make the first prototype? Yeah, so let's get down to the prototype first. It's a pretty fun story. So literally one day I had this, years ago, I had this idea. I said, okay, wait a second. What if I actually what if I can take this idea behind trying to get people into the big toe, right? And how can I do that? So I started making a bunch of different platforms, the jigsaw. Things didn't work for a while. And then I finally settled on one I liked. And I cut it as perfectly as I could and realized that there was a good chance I'd never make one that looked that good again. So I bought a CNC machine and put it in my garage, and I made some files, and I actually cut my own boards out. And I played with a bunch of things to refine placement, angulation, rocker orientation, everything, until I got something that worked really well. I was really happy with that. I made a bunch of them, and then I figured out, okay, wait a second, this actually has some sticking power to it. Can I really pull this off? And need to actually find a place to mass produce these, and so we did. And so MOBO was born. So MOBO stands for mobility board, right? And so the idea is I'm trying to train you to, mobility is an actively controlled task, not just passive like stretching. And so we're trying to, again, I said before, put the foot in the best environment it can be in, right? So there are three unique things about the MOBO board that do that. Number one, we said we want to help athletes stop gripping, right? So using muscles in the shin, right, to curl their toes and to start driving, right? So we want to train that aspect of driving the big toe down to the ground. So if you look at the MOBO board, you can pretend you're looking at an insole on your shoe, and imagine we cut out the area underneath toes 2 through 5. There's just nothing there. And there is something under your big toe. So that you don't have a choice but to shift your body weight over towards your big toe,
Like you just have to. So that's number one. That's interesting. So we call it the toe box. Number two is the board pivots, right? So the board has fins, and I tried to design it pretty eco-friendly. So it's basically flat pack for shipping. So the fins come off, it packs up very small. But the one board does both right and left feet. You can flip it over. But the board is designed to move in the axis of pronation and supination, right? That's how your foot moves. The axis is about 45 degrees off straight ahead of you and about 15 degrees up. So the board pivots 15 degrees up and down, and also, again, that your foot's basically at an angle to mimic how our foot moves. So instead of just trying to make a product and sell it, we said, okay, what's the average anatomy look like, and how can we develop a product to complement that? So we've done a toe box to cue you into your big toe. We let the board move and tilt in a controlled amount, right? Enough that teaches you how to move, but not so much it's so unstable you can't figure it out. It is hard, so you get that good feedback. And number three, it's a weight-bearing closed chain exercise, right? So it's not just you sitting down moving your foot, but you are forced to, I'd say forced, but cued to start to use your foot with your hip. I don't want to get too geeky, but one of the things we look at in a Biomechanics Lab is this thing called the free moment, right? So the free moment is this line of twist that occurs through the entire body. And it's a rotational torque that we have to stabilize as runners, right? So when you think about what happens when you run, our foot rotates down to the ground, right? Our shin rotates, our hip rotates, our core rotates, our torso rotates, right? So we have this counter rotation, and we want to train athletes to drive the big toe down and also drive the hip out to create that torsional link to get stability. So that's where the principle of MOBO is. And then once you're there and you've felt that, and people feel it pretty quickly because you're it sort of biases you in a proper position, then you get to have fun, right? So you mentioned, how do you get buy-in? I mean, there's a fun, novel effect to wobbling, and it's like surfing, right? You get to move and be fluid. So I have a bunch of exercises we have on our website and we've developed, but you can do. Imagine like a TRX, right? People make up their own TRX exercises all day long. So you can use MOBO to train the foot, but you can also use a MOBO during a split squat or during a Romanian deadlift, or various ways to cue proper position. So it was designed to introduce a very good proprioceptive feedback, so you're aware of the position sense, make it a fun environment, and again, give it the things that you can see and feel. And again, we had phenomenal feedback from people saying, wow, like I got on this thing, I was wobbly and unstable, right? Now I've used this for a few weeks, and not only am I better on the MOBO, but I'm actually more solid. I'm standing, walking, running, and jumping. So we're seeing excellent transfer over back in activity.
You're listening to US physical therapist, author, researcher, and founder of the MOBO board, Dicharry. On this, an expert edition around all things athletic, foot function, and performance. Today's episode is brought to you by PhysioCreme. PhysioCreme is a topical massage cream containing natural plant-based ingredients, ideal for the temporary relief of muscular aches and pains. If you're conscious of what you put on your body, you'll be happy to know that PhysioCreme does not contain parabens or hydroxybenzoates, and its non-greasy formula doesn't leave any sticky residue behind. PhysioCreme can be found Australia-wide at your local Coles, chemist or health store, as well as via their online shop. They've offered listeners of the Physical Performance Show 20% off the entire range simply by using the coupon code POGO, P-O-G-O, when you shop at physiocreme.com.au. That's physiocreme.com.au. Hurting sucks, and PhysioCreme have got your back. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo to complete their rehabilitation, get back to their physical best, and cross what we term the physio finish line. Our philosophy is very simple. We do not wish to see you for a session more than what you require or a session less. We just want to ensure that you get back to your physical best and out there enjoying what it is that you love to do. To find out more about Pogo Physio's award-winning services, including our 1-hour initial appointment or our popular online telehealth consultations, jump over to pogophysio.com.au. For now, let's jump back with this week's expert edition, US-based physical therapist, researcher, and founder of MOBO board, Dicharry. On this, a deep dive into all things athletic, foot function, and performance. you split it into kind of 3 prescription areas, if you like, for exercises: the 5 for feet, the crazy 8s, and the rehab type exercises. And we can link up these to the show notes with all the videos. They're excellent. Can you just sort of touch on each of those categories, if you like, Jay?
Yeah, so let's start with the 5 for feet, right? So the 5 for feet, I think that's probably the most bang for buck. I mean, if you had to pick 2 exercises that would kind of get people to really feel their foot intrinsics, I'd say that the 2 most critical ones that we call the foot band twist, right? So the board ships with a piece of elastic tubing, and so what you do is you put the fins on the rocker 2 and 4, so the board pivots and acts as your doorknob, and what you do is you just twist slightly, put your hands in front of you holding the band, you twist towards the outside of your foot, and the board tilts, right? So you learn pretty quickly how much you have to engage your foot to keep the board level versus that, the movement up top imparts some instability, right? So it's really nice because people instantly have that aha moment of, oh, that's what I've been hearing about for forever, right? So again, going back to that aspect of, instead of just talking about things, you can get an athlete to go, I get it. I actually felt what people have been trying to talk to me about for years. So that's number 1. And number 2 is looking at what I call the foot rocks, right? So basically have an athlete stand and balance over the board and then rock the board down to max pronation, max supination. And then we change the fins in the opposite angle to get our perineals to work in perpendicular to the axis of pronation and supination to encourage that foot contact. And people really learn and feel, again, this is where my support base comes from. And they're fun, they're challenging, they're engaging, and sets the tone for kind of everything thereof, right? So that's kind of our 5 for feet. We have 3 more exercises in there, all trying to get people to really sense very specific muscle activation inside the foot.
And then the other categories, Jay, the crazy 8s and the rehab exercises. I mean, rehab exercises are a classic example of prescribing those. Could be someone that's come out of a cam boot or a moon boot, a cam walker for a foot fracture of some kind. So there's applications there.
Yeah, so exactly. So, again, going back to what you said before, I'm out of a boot, and what do? Well, my position said I'm only 50% weight bearing. So again, currently we say, okay, sit at a table, get some TheraBand, move your foot back and forth, which you want to increase tissue density for sure. But remember, part of rehab is what? Integrating our neuromuscular control. So I have to get you into closed chain. So what you do? You take a few books, stack them up. Brad, I recommend your books on your healthy foot, right? And you put your other foot on the MOBO at equal height, and that way you can actually have some people who may not be full weight bearing start to use their foot in conjunction with the rest of the body, right? So we can work on pronation and supination. You can work on some balance tasks. You can actually use 2 MOBOs if you have 2 of them to integrate again left and right. So we can start to get some closed chain work for things that are, again, an end goal is a closed chain success, right? So I always think about the end in mind. So from a rehab standpoint, I'd say that we have to improve tissue density through mechanical loading, through different pulleys and bands and so forth. There's a role for that, 100%. But if you don't do some of these things, you're missing the link in getting people back sooner. So that's kind of our rehab exercises. And then for the crazy 8s, again, I tried to put some suggestions of how you link your foot with the rest of the body, right? So we mentioned doing a single leg deadlift, right? Well, sure, you can do that on the ground, but if you do it on a MOBO, you're forced to do 2 things. You're forced to screw your hip in, and also there's some kind of what I call forced corrections. If you're on a MOBO and you're doing a single leg deadlift, it doesn't allow you to reach too far forward because the board will tip. And one of the big problems we see in deadlifts is that people tend to reach forward, right, instead of actually getting their hip back. And by being on a MOBO, it forces your hip back, which increases the moment arm on the hip, which improves muscle recruitment. So it's like you're getting double bang for your buck. You could do a split squat in a MOBO, right? So instead of just doing something which is primarily targeted towards proximal control, like in the core and the hips, right? You can also couple the foot instability in with this, right? So we're trying, again, you're always trying to build a system, and I think that those crazy 8s allow you to say, look, let me take some conventional quote strengthening exercises and put that proprioceptive recruitment in.
Yeah, brilliant. A couple of things spring to mind. The applications for this for balance, I mean, we're talking about an athletic population, but, the maturing population, falls risk. I mean, let's put people on some fun, novel way to improve that. There's so many applications there, Jay.
100%. Yeah. I mean, again, this could be, those of you who work with, older folks, right? If you have some balance issues, have them put 1 foot or 2 foot in a MOBO and just toss the ball back and forth, right? You're trying to engage that response to that foot strategy. And I think that a lot of times when we do balance work with our patients, I always tell clinicians, if you're doing balance work and the patient instantly changes their pelvic position or their trunk orientation, they're just telling you, all I know how to do is use my hip and my trunk. I don't know how to engage with my foot. And so doing, quote, more balance work is not the answer. Doing things to specifically cue that patient to find the foot reflex, that's what we have to tailor our efforts to.
So it's not just about balance. It's about, as you say, you said you want to get that big toe in contact. There's magic with the big toe when it hits the ground, yeah? And actually, creates force.
100%. That's where your load comes from.
As athletes listening in, and they're now aware that, okay, I need to do something to help this foot function, get my big toe in contact with the ground, learn some dexterity with my toes, and I'm preaching to myself here, Jay, I've neglected my own feet. They're time constrained, they're working jobs, they're recreationally competing. How, whether it's on the MOBO board or starting with foot yoga or whatever it might be, but how much time would they, it's a hard question, I appreciate that, but, do they need to give this 5 minutes a week, once a week, or a couple of times a week, or more? Well, it's hard, I get it, but can you give some advice around that?
For sure. So again, you look at, what type of training are you looking at with something like to improve proprioception and balance, right? You're not looking to develop muscle mass. What you're doing is to look at, changing that neuromuscular recruitment. And all the research in the world on motor learning, how we learn, shows that things done frequently in very small doses are the best way to learn that kind of micro control, right? So I have folks, spend 5 to 6 minutes, 2 to 3 days a week, right? This is not something you have to do every day. If you want to, great. We support that, right? I've never had athletes who are over prepared, but the idea is, less is more, but spread it out more throughout the week, right? So this can be part of your dynamic warm-up before a run. This can be part of your dynamic warm-up in the gym, right? So, whatever if it's great if you need a MOBO board, but if you don't, you need to give your feet attention, right? And so whatever that strategy you're using is, you definitely want to make sure you're exposing your body often to different ways to stabilize your foot, because we know running alone is not a sufficient stimulus to do this, right? We take those compensation patterns we have and we just run in a compensated way, right? So if we want to make a change, you have to do specific work to fix the problems. And that comes from not just more running volume, but that comes from taking a step back and exposing your body to some different sensations.
And Jay, if you could impress upon people listening in one piece of advice from all your learnings across your professional career, your own sporting time and achievements as a junior, what would that one piece of advice be, Jay?
I would say take a deep look at what you've done and what your outcomes were. There's a great fellow named Brad Deweese, who's a researcher in the States, and he had a slide which I think forever changed, I think, integrating things for me. He said, as an athlete, most of us tend to, put an event in the calendar and we train. And then so we had all this stuff we did, this black box. And we say, okay, I started here, I finished here, right? And so I got a result. So let's say you actually took time off the clock, right? Let's say you had a success. Great. Let's look back at that, though. Was what you did in the black box enough, appropriate, intense enough to produce the best effect you could have gotten, right? So instead of thinking about here's where I was and here's where I finished up, so I'd ask people to take a very deep look at where they are and where their outcome was, right? So Brad Deweese is a great researcher in the States, and what he's done is look at what actually happens when we train things, right? So the fact that you do a deadlift is great, but how do you do a deadlift, and how does it actually transfer into skill, right? So let's look at that macroscopic aspect. If you trained and you took 5 minutes off let's say your half marathon time, great. What did you do, though, in that black box, right? So was your activities intense enough, specific enough, direct enough to produce the best change you could have gotten? It's great you knocked 5 minutes off, but maybe you could have dropped 10. Maybe you could have dropped 7. What would that have been? So we tend to say, oh, this is better, and therefore what I did worked. But you could have pushed the needle further. And I think athletes get hung up sometimes saying, okay, well, I trained hard and I got better, and therefore that was the magic plan. That was a plan, and you had a result, and that's great. Kudos for putting in work. But make sure what you're doing is holistic enough. And if you can't figure this out, I mentioned before that kind of like aha moment where we talk together with our patients and athletes and figure out what do you want to do, And is your preparation specific enough to get that desired result? And even it could be a friend. Just have that sounding board on, hey, I did speed work every single week, and you know what? I was pretty flat sometimes because I wasn't recovered enough, right? Or I was hitting the gym really hard because I listened to this great podcast by Brad Beer, and he said go get strong, and I did, and then all of a sudden I was too tired to actually run hard, right? So think about the time of those workouts. So I think take a big look at the end of your season and figure out, was what I did actually what I needed to do to get the best results I could have.
You're listening to US-based physical therapist, researcher, and founder of MOBO board, Jay Dicharry, on this an expert edition on all things athletic foot function and performance. If you missed last week's episode, it was a featured performer episode featuring US distance running star Sarah Hall. Here's a little snippet of what you missed.
There's kind of just this relentlessness, I think, that's been forged in my running career that I think translates to every other area of life, where it's like, you're never comfortable when you're a distance runner, and kind of just being okay with that and like being able to just put your head down and grind it out, which is so valuable. To
tune into the full episode featuring Sarah Hall, simply jump over to wherever it is that you enjoy your podcast from, and whilst there, feel free to peruse the archives, including other featured performer episodes such as Sarah Hall's much esteemed husband, another US distance running star, Ryan Hall, on episode 160. For now, let's jump back with this week's expert edition featuring Jay Dicharry, US physical therapist, researcher, author, and founder of MOBO board. On this, an exploration around all things foot function and performance. Physical challenge, Jay. Every featured guest of the Physical Performance Show issues listeners of the show with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Jay Dicharry's challenge going to be?
Physical challenge for the week. So I would say toe yoga because it's pretty commonplace, pretty easy these days. So let's do what I call the twist and airplane. Okay. So what you're going to do, you are going to stand on, this requires no equipment, by the way. All right. You're going to think about an airplane. Airplanes have pitch and yaw, right? They can tilt side to side. And they can also turn. So what you're going to do, you're going to stand on one foot. I would encourage you to try a dominant foot first. Think about getting equal pressure across the whole metatarsal heads, right? So all the ball of the foot. And then I want you to put your hands to your hips and you're going to tip your torso forward and your leg back like you're doing kind of a tippy bird or a single leg deadlift motion. And then take your hands and I want you to twist your hip inward, twist your hip outward, then back to level, then turn your torso right and turn your torso left. And you want to be able to move your upper body and keep a nice solid foundation connected to the ground. It's a fun little balance challenge. Again, requires no equipment at all, but something that's going to help get you to feel what that big toe feels like.
And how many reps, Jay?
I typically have folks go for 10 to 15 reps. Just kind of go and just get the sense of where you are. I'd encourage folks, if you're going to do this, go less, right? Don't try and rotate 45 degrees of the hip. Rotate 5 or 10, right? It's a small little balance challenge up top, creates a lot of micro instability in the foot.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's what the twist and airplane toe yoga physical challenge from Jay Dicharry. Jay, you're a prolific author. Running Rewired came out October 2017. Prior to that, Anatomy for Runners, and uncannily, you can run pain-free, got picked up into Chinese, and at the same time, you were due to speak at the same Chinese 2019 Beijing International Rehab Conference. So you're a prolific author. And I pulled this little snippet out of Running Rewired, which I encourage every listener to get a copy of. It's a terrific read. And it's this, and I think it really sums up your approach. It starts with this little secret. Your body drives your running form. The old adage says form follows function. Likewise, running form follows body function. Running better requires you to move better, under stress, under fatigue, and under the hot sun, with your arch rival breathing down your neck. In these moments, you don't have the luxury of going over an 8-point mental checklist on running form and body awareness. You should have learned that routine a long time ago, and it begins now. And I really think that encapsulates your approach, whether it's like we're talking about the foot and ankle or just the running body in general. So anything you'd add lastly to that?
No, Brad, it does entirely. I think the quote I always tell folks is, build skill, right? Build skill, build control, build awareness. It's important for the foot, important for the spine, important for everything. And so, if you're a runner who's having a hard time and people say, oh, don't slump when you run so much, like you need to take a look at things that aren't running problems, right? Your posture alignment all day long is critical, right? If you have, some issue recruiting hip muscles, like take time to finish that. And so when somebody says, oh, push more at the backside, and you're like, I have no clue what you're talking about, right? right? That skill needs to be there so that when somebody gives you a tip, you know what to do. And the more we practice these things, the more we learn. The more we learn, the better you run.
Build skill, Jay Dicharry. Jay, you're a sports science treasure. So thank you for your contribution to this show. I thank you personally for the contribution to my own professional career. And if we want to find out more about the books or follow your journey or look at the MOBO board, where's the best way to do that? What's the best way, to do that?
Yeah, Brad, thank you. You can find our lab at reporegon.com. You can find MOBO board at moboboard.com. You can find us on Instagram at mobo.board. And you can find our books online for Anatomy for Runners and Running Rewired. And thanks a ton, Brad.
So there you have it. I trust you enjoyed this expert edition with Jay Dicharry. If you did, then please jump over and let Jay know what it was that you took away from his sharings. You'll find Jay over on Instagram at Jay Dicharry, JayDicharry. Don't forget to follow MOBO board for some fantastic exercise ideas relating to your foot function. That's simple, mobo.board over on Instagram. Jump over to the website, moboboard.com. There you'll find all the exercises Jay referenced, including 5 for the feet, crazy 8s, and other rehab exercises. If you take on the physical challenge for the week, do let Jay know or even provide some video evidence. You'll find the show's handles over on Instagram at Physical Performance Show, where you can tag us in or also tag myself in at Brad_Beer on Instagram or Twitter. It is annual feedback time for the Physical Performance Show, and you can go into the draw to win a $50 Amazon gift card simply by letting us know what you think about the show. All feedback is welcome. Thank you to the many folk who have been leaving feedback already. It's a cinch to leave it. Jump over to pogophysio.com.au/podcast and hit the big green button and go into the draw. We're taking feedback through our annual survey right through until the final episode of 2019, where the winner will be announced. Massive thanks to those leaving ratings and reviews on iTunes and hitting subscribe. Subscribe really is the best way to help this show grow. Also, if you know anyone that would benefit from Jay's sharings today, do reach out and share the episode with them. Thank you in advance. On thank yous, thank you again to today's sponsor, PhysioCrem. Your support really does make this show possible week in, week out. Thanks as always to the great folk who work behind the scenes to make this show possible. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, and Matthew Olding on all things show graphic design. In addition to checking out the MOBO board from Jay Dicharry, I also suggest getting your hands on his excellent books, Anatomy for Runners and Running Rewired. They are fantastic books that will help you if you are into your running as your physical pursuit. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we're closing in fast towards the end of 2019, and what an incredible year it has been. But we are not done yet. We jump over next week to a Coach's Corner episode featuring triathlon coach of the current world female and world male triathlon series champions, Katie Zafiris, former featured guest of the show, and Vincent Louis. That is Joel Filiol. Incredibly, Jay has coached his athletes to 5 world titles in recent years. 3 titles to Spaniard Mario Mola, 2016, 17 and 18. 1 world title in 2019 to Vincent Louis, and also 1 world title to Katie Zafiris in 2019. Joel has a stable of triathlon superstars, and he's also the performance director for the Federation of Italian Triathlon. Jay has been around triathlon for 2 decades plus, and next week you'll hear from Jay around why success is not owned, but it is rented. And the rent, as Joel says, is due every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can never take it for granted that we're going to continue to be successful. Complacency kills. So I think, how do we continue to improve? And I say that to myself every year, okay, we've achieved some things, but the world keeps getting better, and we have to continue to get better, every year and in every way.
It's a fascinating insight into one of the world's great endurance coaches. So be sure to be tuning in next week to the Physical Performance Show. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.